Welcome, everybody. This is CertaPay's sixth coffee chat. We are so glad you're here. Oh, muting the new people. Please mute yourselves when you jump in, and we can keep the background noise down that way. And so anyway, welcome to CertaPay. We're so glad you're here, and we are covering some important topics these days. I am Rachel Camella, your host, and I am here with Cindy Merkel. She's our moderator, and we've got Janet Lang on the line from our HR team as well. And we're going to dig into the PPP loan forgiveness. How can you maximize your forgiveness amount? As I said, the chat box is open. If you have questions, go ahead and type them in there, and we will get to them. How we doing? Everybody good? All right, I have a couple people. I need you to just go mute your phones so we can keep that background noise down, and we'll get rolling.
And folks, just so you know, I will monitor and keep all the questions. We are not going to answer any questions until the very end. There's just way too much information, and it will get lost in the minutia of the conversation if we don't hold out till the end. But we will get to them.
Absolutely. And if we don't get to them today, we will get to them next week. So we're going to put together, if there are so many questions, let's see what happens. We'll go through it and see where we go. As I said, you know, this is a lot of information. And when a lot of you on this line have had some involvement in the PPP loan application, so you know already a piece of this. So just a quick overview. This is a loan. It applies to employers with under 500 employees, and that is per location. It's based on an average number of payroll dollars spent in a month times 2.5, and that's what gives you the 8-week wage information. You have an 8-week window to pay the wages. You have some wiggle room. We're going to get to that. And this loan can be 100% forgivable if. This is where we get going. Okay, you follow these 5 simple steps, we're going to get you the most money forgiven for your loan. You want to use eligible expenses, very specific. Headcount is extremely important. In order to get that forgiven amount, you want to keep that headcount up or return the headcount, restore it to your pre-coronavirus numbers. Keep the wages up, make sure you apply for forgiveness, and document everything along the way. Pretty easy. If you break it down like that, that's what we're dealing with. Okay, so let's go. Let's start with the eligible expenses. We've got, and you know what, I want to start by saying there was a Senate bill passed this morning that makes some changes to this. And so we'll kind of speak to some of these changes that are possibly coming. It was not a full quorum. The Senate is technically not in session, so these changes are not in effect. Once it is completely passed and then goes through and the president signs the bill, then we'll have some changes to deal with. It's most likely going to happen, but we're just not there yet. So in the meantime, all of these things still apply. And I'll speak to some of those changes as we go through. First, let's talk about eligible expenses. In order to do that, we need to talk about the 8-week window. So originally, it was stated that it was the exact 8 weeks, 56 days. Don't be confused by a 2-month window. It isn't 2 months. It is 8 weeks or 56 days, very specific. So if you got your disbursement, but your payroll cycle didn't start yet, this is where we have a little bit of wiggle room there. You can have an alternative 8-week window, the eligible period. So the eligible period can shift to match your payroll cycle if you are a biweekly payroll every other week, or if you're every week. If you are a semi-monthly or a monthly pay cycle, then you cannot do that alternate. You just want to carve out the exact weeks that start from your disbursement date. But if you had a biweekly payroll or a weekly payroll, then you can shift the start of your 8-week counter to the first day of your next pay cycle. Does that make sense to everybody? All right, so what's that, Cindy?
Nothing, go ahead.
Okay, so now let's look at the actual eligible expenses. You know, you've got a 75-25 ratio, so 75% on actual payroll costs, 25% on non-payroll costs. This is one of the changes. The proposed change is 60%, 40%. And so under the 75% payroll cost, it's really driven by this number, but if you don't spend it all, it's okay. They just adjust your 25% ratio. Under the new proposal, the 60% would be a minimum threshold. If you did not meet that 60%, then nothing is forgiven. But for now, let's talk about 75-25. So it's 75, and it is driven by that payroll cost number. So if you get, well, let's go through what they are. So under this, you've got salaries, wages, commissions, tips, bonus dollars, anything that you pay to your employees. These are just your cash costs. And then you've got other payroll related costs that are part of this 75%. So benefits like your vacation pay, sick pay, retirement deposits to the 401k, healthcare premiums. Now, this does not apply to FFCRA dollars that are paid. So if you have an individual employee who is out on the expanded child care provision or on sick pay as a result of COVID under the FFCRA, that is separate. So you would have to carve those dollars out. If you actually had an employee who is out on FFCRA, those dollars need to be carved out from your payroll dollars, or simply pay them under your PPP loan dollars and don't apply it toward FFCRA. Another thing you can do where they work together is if you have an employee, let's say, who is out on FFCRA for childcare, then you can use the FFCRA dollars for that individual and then hire somebody different and pay them with your loan dollars. So the way to think about that is you cannot double dip. So you can use one of these benefits for a single employee. There's no overlap, so be careful about that. Also, you've got your state and local taxes that are part of that 75% payroll cost number. This does not count Social Security and federal tax dollars for your quarterly 941. So keep that in mind. One thing that you can do, again, there is some overlap. So if you got the PPP loan and you're going to have federal tax dollars due on your 941 quarterly, but you can defer those. That is an option. So those taxes, you're not going to use payroll PPP loan dollars to pay for those quarterly taxes. However, you do have the option to defer those, and the same thing applies on deferral. So 50% would be paid by December of 2021, and the remaining 50% would be paid by December of 2022. So that's an option there, or pay them in the normal cycle. Now, once you get the determination of your loan being forgiven, then you can no longer defer the taxes. So while you're in the window, the deferral is in place, and those are set for deferral. But once your determination of forgiveness has been made, following that, you would fall into the normal 941 quarterly payroll tax cycle.
Rachel,
now let's talk about.
Rachel, I am going to stop you for 1 second. We did not put this on the slide, and it's a good question. What about paying CertaPay? Can you use this money to pay your payroll company?
Yes, so anything connected to your payroll cost. So those would be in there. And I did see somebody asked a question about the change to the bill of the 8-week window to the 24, and that's correct, but it isn't passed yet. This is most likely going to happen, but we're not there yet, and that would extend the amount of time that you can return your employee headcount. So what we're going to do is an update as soon as we have that bill completely passed and signed, but we're not quite there yet. And keeping in mind, Senate is not in session and there wasn't a quorum. So we've got a couple of steps that we still need to go through. And in the meantime, this is where we are. That's a good point. So let's look at the non-payroll costs. So that would be your interest on a mortgage, your rent or lease payment, utilities for your electric bill or your internet, you know, those kinds of utility payments. And what we look at is your percentage is driven by the payroll number. So that means if you got a $100,000 loan, but you only spent $60,000 on your payroll and not that full $75,000, which is the 75%, you don't automatically get 25%. It's reduced based on your payroll dollars spent. So then we would multiply, or we would divide that $60,000 that you spent on payroll dollars by 0.75 to get $80,000. So that adds 25% onto that. Your 25% will change based on your payroll dollars. That's the driver.
So Certipig.
Okay.
All right. Now let's talk about headcount. So headcount is another very important point. This can change your forgiveness amount. And the new bill extends the amount of time that you can return people. Again, we're not there. We're still in our regular window of time. But this is what you want to look at. We got the application and it talked about the FTEs, the full-time equivalents, and we're all used to that because of our ACA reporting that went into effect a couple years ago. So for this purpose, when we talk about the full-time equivalent, it's just for this purpose. We're talking about 40 hours full-time, but that's only on this application, only for your forgiveness. Once this is over, we're going to go back to our regular FTE format that we're all familiar with. So just for this, you want to think in terms of 40 hours calculating a single employee. So you could use a format of add up all the hours in the pay cycle, divide by 40, and that's your FTE, your full-time equivalent number. Or simply count 1 for somebody who works 40 hours or more and 0.5 for everybody under that. And just do that for each person. Are they a 1 or a 0.5? And then add up your numbers from there. And that keeps it pretty simple. The important thing is that you use the same format to calculate your covered period, which is your 8-week window, and your eligible period, which is what you're comparing to from last year. So the important thing is use the same format for both. And so that's what we look at. Your covered period is the 8-week window that we are talking about for you to use your loan dollars. And the eligible period, you pick. That's what you're comparing. Are you going to use the exact same window of time from last year, from 2019? Or if you didn't have employees in 2019, you could use January and February of 2020. That's up to you. If you're a seasonal employer and you've got seasonal employees, you want to use last year's equivalent window. That makes the most sense. So let's look at that some more. You've got your FTE, your full-time equivalent count. Let's say during this cover period, I've got 20 employees, but in this same window last year, my eligible window, I had 25 employees. Then I'm going to have a forgiveness reduction. That means I'm going to take the current numbers, 20, and I'm going to divide by last year's numbers, 25. And that will give me a reduction number of 0.8. This will be important when we get to our actual application form. And this is why it's very important to have your head count match up. You want to have that forgiveness reduction be a 1. And the way you do that is have the same number of employees. Even if you're 1 or 2 off, you're going to have a point something number on that forgiveness number. So you want to make sure you have the same number of employees. And this is what it looks like. Let's go back to the same thing. Let's say you got a loan of $100,000, but you had 5 less employees than you did last year, you're going to have that 0.8 forgiveness quotient, and that will mean your maximum for forgiveness is only going to be 80,000. So having your head count up is going to be very important. So what happens if you don't? Well, don't apply for forgiveness yet. Wait until you have your numbers all the way returned before you reply and before you apply for forgiveness. So currently, you have until June 30th to restore those numbers. This is one of the things in the change that we anticipate is you will have until the end of the year to increase those numbers. So you want to wait. Don't apply for forgiveness until your employee count has reached the same number, and that will make a difference. Another thing that you can do now and in the change is you have some exceptions. If you made some offers to employees who decided not to return, if you tried to get employees back and you could not find sufficient employees to fill those positions, there are some headcount exemptions for you, and I'll show you where that is on the form. But that these employees will not count against you. If you tried and couldn't find them, you issued offer letters and people declined to return, there are some exceptions that will help you so that your employee count stays up. And we'll talk about that when we get to the form. So now let's talk about wages. It's important to keep the wages up too. This is going to be calculated on an individual basis. So you will look at each person's wages from last year and this year, and you will make sure that you didn't reduce them more than 25%. There is a cushion in there. So the requirement is going to be that you keep the wages at least 75% of what they were before. So you have a cushion, but if you, as soon as you get the loan, increase your wages all the way back up. If you made a reduction, let's say 10% across the board, you're still in a safe window, but since you got the loan dollars, you might as well bump them back up to where they were. All right, let's keep going. Let's dig into our application form. This is the fun part. So you got that 11-page application, and there's 3 camps out there. So the first group of you got the application, immediately went through it and started reading it and understanding all of the lines and definitions. The second group of you out there got that application and said, oh my gosh, it's 11 pages, and tossed it on the desk. And then there's that third group out there, and you haven't even looked at it yet, so you don't even know. No worries. We are going to go through all of it. We'll all be on the same page at the end. So yes, it's 11 pages, but let's really break it down. What do these pages look like? So pages 1 and 2, instructions and definitions, easy. Pages 3 and 4, this is your actual application. You're going to turn this into your lender. And really, the only content on that is on page 3. Page 4 is initials and signatures and acknowledgments. Page 5 is your instructions for the Schedule A. Page 6 is the Schedule A. This will also be turned into your lender. Pages 7 and 8 are the instructions for the worksheet. And the worksheet's very important. Page 9 is your worksheet. And that's where you're going to gather all the information and figure out what goes where. And we're going to get to that. And then you have page 10 is a list of the documents that you want to keep filed, do this, that, you know, turn in a nice list there. And then you've got page 11 is a voluntary demographic form. This is optional. You can fill it out, turn it in or not, totally up to you. So the first thing I did is separate them into 3 piles. You've got your actual application, the Schedule A, and the worksheet in 3 separate sections. All right, here we go. So go to the Schedule A worksheet. This is great. You can look in here and you can see box 1, box 2, box 3, and so on. Once you get the information in these boxes, they feed straight over to your Schedule A. And then your Schedule A feeds to the application. So we're going to start backwards. if you start with the worksheet, this is a great form if you have 7 or under employees, and you can just write your information right on this form. If not, do an Excel spreadsheet on the computer, make a list, whatever you want to do. Just have your box 1, box 2, have your columns match so that you can follow the same format. Another thing that we recommend is do one for your covered period, which is your 8-week window to spend your loan dollars, and do one for your eligibility period, which is the same period last year or January, February, whatever you're using for your eligible period. You can even do them in the same form. So maybe you have one line down of all of your numbers for your covered period, and then one line down in the same form for last year's numbers. And then you have a side-by-side comparison. So if we dig in a little bit here, you have the cash compensation. This is the column for box 1. These are all of the dollars paid for each employee. And then you have that average FTE number, and that very simply is either going to be a 1 or a 0.5. It's the easiest to just count each person as 1 or a half and then add them up at the end, and that will be your box 2 total. Again, you're comparing it against last year at the same time. Simple. Now, that column for box 3, this is your salary hourly wage reduction. This is a little bit complicated. If you're paying people the same amount, that number is 0 and you're done. If you have reduced the wages more than 25%, that's when we're going to take a look at that. So if you go to the bottom of page 7, there's a worksheet that helps you with that right there. So when you list the reduction dollar amount, hold on, muting people. When you list the reduction dollar amount in there, it's not the full reduction. So if you went from 100% pay level to a 60% pay level, you only need to list the difference between the 60% and the 75% because your threshold is that 25% difference. So once you go above that amount, then that's the dollar amount that you list there, not the full thing to get them up to that 100. And if that doesn't make sense, let me know. We can do a quick example. But you have, on the bottom of page 7, you have a little worksheet to help you with that, to figure out that difference. So then you're going to add up these numbers. And with that salary wage difference, you do each individual employee. If you have employees now that you did not have before, that's okay. There's no reduction. It's the same. You're just going to add up all of the wage, the cash compensation. This is only going to apply if you've got an employee who you reduced their pay on. Down here on the bottom, we've got box 4 and 5, and these are for your employees who had a salary of over 100,000, and there's no wage reduction column here, and that's because they're over the threshold anyway, so there's no reduction amount there. All right, so let's keep moving. Now we're going to go to Schedule A. And you can see these numbers. You see box number 1 here. We pulled that straight off of box number 1 here. So once you have your cash compensation totals listed in here, you've got your total on the bottom, all you do is populate it over here. This line is your FTE, your full-time equivalent number. You just populate it from your other form straight into Schedule A. This is your reduction. Says right here, box 3, you're just going to populate these numbers. Box 4 and 5, you populate these numbers. Now, we're going to see what other things are going to be included in your payroll cash numbers. So you'll add in here your health insurance premiums, any retirement plan payments, state and local tax dollars. So these are, all of these numbers are going to be added up to be your total compensation numbers. And you can see down in the bottom here, line 10 is your total payroll costs, basically all of those added up. And then we've got line 11, which is your average FTE, your full-time equivalent count. That goes right in there, and you're going to compare against the chosen reference period. That's what we talked about. That's the eligible period from last year or either January, February. So you have those two numbers right there. your current employee count compared against last year's or the beginning of the year employee count. Now, this is where we get that reduction number. So line 13 is that reduction. You're just simply taking your average number now divided by your average number last year. And that's your number. It should be a 1. If you have more employees now than you did last year, your number is a 1 in line 13. If you have fewer employees now than you did last year, then it's going to be a point something, 0.8, 0.7, 0.9, whatever that is, that number is going to go here, the FTE reduction. And that's going to be important when we get to the actual application. Here we are. Simple on the top. That's your company information, your loan amount, your loan information, and then you've got the payroll schedule. Are you biweekly, weekly, semi-monthly, whatever it is? And so you're going to check that here. And then as I mentioned, you have your covered period. Your covered period is from the disbursement date, spanning out 8 weeks or 56 days. The alternative period will be the first day of your pay cycle if you are weekly or biweekly, following your disbursement date, and then 8 weeks from that. So you put that information in there. It seems as though loans over $2 million may get audited. There's a good chance if your loan is $2 million or more, then you're going to be under a little bit more scrutiny. If you're under that, it is very clear that the lender is not required to independently verify all of this information. They are simply going to say, yes, we got all the documents. Yes, they provided us with a statement that it's true, and that's it. They're not going to go through the details of what you turn in. They're only going to say, yes, you turned it in. So important information. They want to forgive these loans. So you just have to go through all these steps, fill out the forms, provide the documentation, and you should be pretty good to go. All right. So forgiveness calculations. This is where we really get down to the actual number. Your payroll costs right here are feeding straight in from line 10 on your Schedule A. So line 10 is right here. You added up all of your costs, you came up with that total, and then you filled it right in. Simple. And now you're going to add in your non-payroll costs. So these are your payroll totals, and then you're going to put in your mortgage interest, your lease payments, utilities, all those things. So you're going to get basically a new total of what you've spent so far. Now you have your adjustments. If you had any salary or wage reductions on that Schedule A that we did from each employee, then you enter that total there. And then we go to the amounts added together. You add all of this up, and then you subtract out your reductions. This is how much you've spent. And then you have your FTE reduction. This is that point whatever number. Hopefully it's a 1. If you have the same number of employees or more now, then line 7 on your FTE reduction on this form is going to be a 1. If you have fewer employees now, you're going to put a point whatever that reduction number is in there. Okay, so now we're down to the final numbers. You have line 8, line 9, and line 10. These are 3 different calculations that will give you 3 different totals. One of these totals will be your forgiveness amount. And whichever one of these numbers is the lowest is your amount forgiven. So how do you make sure you get the highest possible number? You want your same loan amount forgiven. So that's the goal. And it has to do with that employee count and the dollars you spend. So let's do some examples. That line 8 is your modified total. So that's the one where you're adding in that full-time equivalent reduction quotient. And here's an example here. Let's say we'll go with our $100,000 number. Let's say you received $100,000 in your loan. And during the 8-week window, you spent $68,000 on payroll. you spent $22,000 on non-payroll costs, but you have 20 employees now versus last year you had 25. So you know you've got this 0.8 FTE reduction. So line 8, you're going to take your eligible payments, that's your 68 and your 22, times your FTE reduction, times that 0.8 number. And that's going to take you to 72,000. So line 8, your modified total will be 72,000 under this example. So now let's go to line 9. You got 100,000 in your loan. It's listed on the top of the form. You drop it down here. Line 9 is your loan amount. Simple. Line 10 is the payroll cost adjustment if you didn't spend all of it. So if you got 100,000 and 75% is $75,000, so you could spend 25,000 in other expenses, but let's say you didn't spend 75,000, now your other percentage has to adjust. So in this example, let's say you only spent 68,000 on wages. We're going to divide that by 0.75 to get our new 25% total. So now your total is only 90,000 that can be forgiven based on how much you paid in wages. So your line 10 number is going to be 90,000 under this example. Now, line 11 is your forgiveness amount. You're just going to take the lowest number in these three, and that would be the 72. So your forgiveness amount listed in line 11 would be this 72,000.
I was just going to do that.
So here's what I want to say, a couple of things. When we look at this line 10, this payroll costs, one of the new provisions in the adjusted bill is that the threshold will be changing to a 60-40 percentage. However, if you do not meet the 60% threshold, nothing will be forgiven at all. So it's making it easier to spend the dollars, but it's making it more important to spend the dollars on wages. So again, an update we will keep you informed about, and something that we expect to be final, maybe not for another week or two, but we will definitely keep you guys posted on that 60-40. All right, and finally, I want to talk about documentation. So the PPP forgiveness calculation forms, pages 3 and 4, and page 6, you're going to actually turn those into your lender. You want to have all of the backup that matches that prepared to turn in. So any of your payroll records, your payroll register, bank statements that show the payroll payments made, and then any backup for how you calculated your FTE, your full-time equivalent numbers, your grids, your calculations. You want to show which time periods you used to compare against. And then you want to show anything for your non-payroll expenses, like your mortgage interest payments or your rent lease payments, any of your utility bills and those payments, provide those as backup. As I said before, your lender is only going to check the box that you turned it all in. They are not going to independently verify. They want to forgive your loan. So you want to do everything possible to give them as much information so they can say, yep, we got it all. And then finally, how long do you keep this? You want to keep these for 6 years, but 6 years from when? 6 years from your forgiveness date, or 6 years from the final payment. So anything that doesn't get forgiven is going to automatically be converted to a loan at that 1% interest. Currently, the payback window is 2 years, and that is likely going to be extended to up to 5 years, but we'll keep you posted on that as well. So there's a couple of things. These are our final thoughts here. The employee head count is extremely important. You have time to get to the point where you can add employees back in. If you add them back in, if you're already approaching the end of your 8-week window, but you delay turning in your application for forgiveness until you return your headcount to normal, that will be better for you. So think about that. When, and that's the other thing I want you to remember. Think about when you apply. Are you deferring your 941 tax payments? Does it make sense to wait a little bit longer if you want to do that deferment? Do you need to wait to apply until you get that employee headcount returned to pre-COVID numbers? Think about when you apply, because once that forgiveness is granted, then you start a different timer. So pay attention to that as well. And finally, do your best. Do the best you can. Fill out this information. Don't worry about it so much. If you try and you stick to these guidelines and use these forms and use this information, do the best you can, you're going to be okay. They want to forgive these dollars. So do the best you can, and most likely you'll get the results you want. Phew. How are we doing on questions?
I have 3 full pages. Let me know when you're ready.
I'm ready. Let's hear it.
All right, let's start back up at the very top. Does this apply to payroll services? We've already answered that, so that would be a yes.
Yeah.
There was a change that was passed to the bill. Actually, the next question, Rachel, alludes to the fact from this morning, which you've already covered, that it's being discussed, but it's not in.
Yeah, we'll keep you posted on changes as soon as we know, don't worry.
Okay, it says state and local taxes. What about federal? Are federal taxes a part of this, Rachel?
No, so as I said, federal tax dollars you're not using the PPP loan to pay federal tax dollars. And that's why you are able to defer your federal tax dollars to the end of, to December of 2021 and December of 2022. But once your loan is forgiven, then you actually fall back into the normal quarterly tax cycle.
Next question, will CertaPay provide documentation for this process?
CertaPay can help you with quite a bit of the documentation, absolutely. We have codes in place. We have endless customized reporting available, so you could put in dates and times and figure out employee counts and wages paid, and we can pretty much help you create a report for any of these pieces, absolutely.
Is workers' comp included for the PPP?
Workers' comp premiums are not included in this, so that would be separate. But if you have somebody who's out on a work comp injury and you're paying wages during that time, then yes, that would apply. Okay.
I was told that the FTE can be from a time frame of May 1st of 19 to 9/15 of 19.
They might expand the time, but what you're looking at is a window of time from 2019 that goes through June. So it's basically the time period from now, the exact time period from last year. So that's what you're looking at. And let's say you didn't have employees last year, you could use January and February of 2020. But you're basically comparing the same thing from last year. If you weren't open last year and you needed to do some adjustments, or if you're seasonal, there are some different things in there. And the comparison window may be expanded under the new bill. Again, we'll keep you posted on that.
In the non-payroll expense, it states utilities, gas, electric, phone, internet, transportation. We do not have what constitutes quote unquote transportation. Have you heard what these items, this item includes? Basically, the question is what constitutes transportation costs?
So I'm not sure exactly what's included in transportation specifically. We'll get you some more information on that and some clarity. A lot of this stuff isn't all that clear. We know that, and we're constantly looking for new guidance. But when they're referring to transportation, it has to be business related. So this does not include transportation of an employee to and from work. It specifically has to do with business function. So if you have vehicles or a fleet that you have to pay the lease payments on or interest on those, if it's directly connected to your business function, that's the intent. But we'll make a note of that, and I'll see if I can do some digging on that.
Rachel, can you just discuss that, again, it's come up, I have multiple same questions, as far as the 56 days, the 8 weeks, the payroll cycles. There seems to be some confusion of what exactly that means for them.
Okay, so what are we saying? What is the window of time?
Correct. A lot of folks have the 8-week window. Their payroll, they're afraid their payroll is going to be done. Their 8 weeks are going to be done, and then their final payroll is going to fall. So if the payroll falls after their 56 days, I think we just need to better define what that means.
Okay, yeah. Okay, great. So the way it works is you get your disbursement, you get your loan disbursement, and then let's say that's the middle of your payroll cycle. That's okay. And this, again, if you are biweekly or weekly is who we're talking about here. So you got your first installment of your PPP loan on Wednesday, whatever date, but your payroll cycle starts on the next Monday. So now you can change your alternative period to start on that Monday and go 8 weeks from that Monday. And now what we know is at the end, that Sunday, the last Sunday in the 8th week, your payroll is most likely the following Friday. That's okay. So it's the alternative period of 8 weeks for which you're paying your employees. And it's okay because that was one of the things originally, the payroll cycles were not matching up. And so that's why they made this provision, is so that we can match it to your payroll cycle a little bit better. Now, the reason it doesn't apply to somebody who's semi-monthly or monthly is because it's not based on 2 full months anyway. So you had to carve that up. And so they just said, no, you stick with the 8-week window from disbursement, or start on a Monday and go 8 weeks, but you've got to carve yours up anyway. Versus if somebody is biweekly or weekly, as the majority of payroll cycles are, then it's easy to just shift your 8 weeks. So instead of starting on your disbursement date, you just start on the first day of the next payroll cycle, whenever that is.
The question, it says the effective date. Do you use your paycheck date or the pay period date?
The pay period date. So it's the first day of the pay period, not the check date.
Okay, next question. We have employees that work different positions at different hourly rates. Is the variance hourly, monthly, or annually?
It's an average of the window you're taking. So if you add up everything that you paid the individual and then look at everything you paid them in the equivalent time period last year and see what the difference is.
Does rent expense include sales tax paid? I'm not quite sure. Rent would be included. I'm not sure what this individual meant by include sales tax paid.
I'm not sure sales tax. Yeah, I'm not sure about sales tax on rent. So whatever your full rent payment is eligible in the non-payroll costs, whatever your full rent payment is.
Next question. If you had no wage changes, is your number always going to be 0?
Yes.
Next question. We had 3 employees who retired before COVID-19. If one position was replaced by a new employee at a significantly reduced salary, how does that impact us?
Okay, say that again. Okay, say that again.
They retired 3 employees during COVID, so their headcount is down by 3. They replaced one of the positions. However, that position was a significantly reduced salary. So now they're down 2 people and down extra money on the 3rd person.
Well, because the 3rd person is a different position, it doesn't matter. You're still putting 0 on the wage reduction, but you have an issue with the reduced employee count. So be careful, either replace some people or you'll have that reduction quotient.
The follow-up to that was, should we seek a letter to offer to rehire the retirees? Sure.
Well, you could do that. Yeah, sure. And so here's the thing. If you attempt to hire people back and they don't return, or even if you attempt to hire anybody, if let's say you are trying to find employees to hire and you cannot find anybody, then that FTE can be exempt. Oh, and I wanted to show you where it is on the form. Let's go to the worksheet, because I didn't point this out. So you see on this worksheet here, it has FTE reduction exception. Can you guys see this number, this field? And then only under the average FTE, you're going to count numbers there. So let's say under that FTE reduction exception, you might have 3 people who you sent an offer letter to and they each declined to return, then you would put 3 there for those 3 individuals. Or let's say you have an open position and you're attempting to fill it. You have had interviews and meetings. You cannot find a qualified person to fill that. Then that would be counted as 1 under this exception here. Again, you want to make sure you have backup documentation for that. You have proof of letters issued. You have proof of declines from potential employees, and you will have that backup available. But there is an exception for that FTE headcount if you cannot get back to your equivalent number. So you want to be mindful of that and take advantage of that if you can.
Next question. We already have received our funds. Will all this paperwork be required for us to submit as proof of payment to the employees, rent, etc.?
Yes, you will. That will be, if you look at page 10 on that form, that's going to give you a list of documentation that you will be asked to provide and save. So you can go through that list. There's some things listed on there, what you want to have. You will need to have backup for everything that you do.
Okay, hang on. I'm copying and pasting at the same time. We use weekly pay schedules and then pay 1 employee monthly. Do we just check both boxes? I'm not quite sure.
Yeah, you might check. No, just check the check the biweekly box and then make sure the covered period matches, and do the same covered period for your monthly employee. And just to have that, just make sure that your wages for that employee match the same pay cycle for the purpose of this.
How do you calculate an FTE for someone who started mid-cycle? For example, week 4 of the 8 weeks.
They still count as 1. Well, if they're full-time. So let's say they're returning 40 hours or more, they would count as 1. If they are under that number, they are 0.5. And even though they didn't work the entire period, they still count toward your FTE number. And keep in mind, if let's say you get through your 8-week window and you haven't returned to your full FTE number from the previous cycle, then wait, don't apply. Hire more people, get that FTE count up. Once your FTE count up is full, then do your forgiveness application so that you can write that, we are full.
Okay, Rachel, this goes to your one of your slides with a mathematical equation. The individual is asking where you got the $68,000 from. If you could go back, I can tell you what slide. Keep going. Right
This one?
there.
Yeah, so I just made it up. It's a made-up example. But the 68,000 would be the payroll dollars. So what that would be, what we looked at on our form. So payroll costs right here, line 1, and that would come from your Schedule A, backwards. So on the Schedule A, your payroll costs right here, total payroll costs. So this would be your cash compensation, any reduction that you might have, total amount paid to health insurance, retirement, state and local taxes. That's the numbers that I was using, but it's just a made up example.
What if employees quit and were not laid off and you replace them?
So if they quit and you replace them, you're fine. That's one gone, one back. So you're fine there. It's still one. And then the other thing is you can claim an exception if somebody quits and then you have a hard time replacing that person. You can put a 1 in your FTE exception space. Or let's say you have to terminate somebody for cause. If there's some egregious behavior and you had to terminate somebody for cause, you can count that as one of your exceptions.
Okay, next question. Regarding payroll costs, can you speak to the change in the instructions from costs paid and incurred, I can't even say the word, help me out, Rachel, I can't even say the word, incurred during the cover period. Basically what they want to know is they want to know the instructions for the costs incurred during COVID versus incurred during paid wages. You know what, hang on, let me skip this one and email it to you.
Are they asking about the cash compensation number?
I'm not really sure. Hang on.
All right.
Let's move along. Can the owners be forgiven for their own personal paychecks?
They can, but the 100,000 cap still applies. So it's the max forgiven is that 15,000 number, same as anyone else who exceeds that 100,000.
Okay. I emailed you that one particular question, and I'll move along. I heard this morning that loans of 150,000 will be automatically forgiven. Is that true?
We're not sure. We're going to keep our eyes on that. We'll give you an update as soon as we hear more. I've heard some different numbers, but I think there might be an automatic forgiven, but the other provisions apply as well. So if you had to have spent at least 60% of your loan dollars on wages, and again, this has not passed. We're not all the way through this, but it looks to me like if you had a loan under 150,000 and you spent at least 60% of it on wages, then it would be forgiven. However, if you don't spend that 60% threshold, and that applies to everybody, if you do not spend the 60% threshold on wages, then none of it is forgiven. So that is going to be a very important threshold in the new provision. Again, we are not exactly sure. Okay,
Rachel, are the loan forgiveness procedures any different for a sole proprietor?
They are slightly different, but not all that much different. It's pretty much the same. You got the same form. You have the same information. There are just a few slight differences.
Okay. Somebody chimed in as far as the transportation. Their CPA told them that gas and mileage would be forgiven as well. So that's just some good information. So thank you for whomever wrote that.
Perfect. Thank you.
What about a
vehicle? If it's connected to operating expenses, yeah.
What about a vehicle, a food truck specifically, that was not allowed to operate, but there is still a lease expense on it? Is that an allowable expense?
Well, if they got food truck that got a PPP loan,
they're leasing the truck most likely, so they're leasing down the tree.
Yeah, I mean, that would be the same as a rent payment or a lease payment. So my thought on that is yes, it is. But again, you know, we can get some clarification on that.
Next question. What about COVID expenses, Zoom, masks, sanitizers, etc., that we have had to incur? Is that part of the 25%?
It is not. That is not part of it.
Okay.
So those would be considered supplies, and so that's a little bit different. That's under a different category, and that is not part of the eligible expenses.
We have one employee that voluntarily reduced her hours to part-time. Would that be a reduction in the FTE?
Yeah, so she would go, or he or she would go from a 1 to a 0.5. And so you could either replace with another 0.5 FTE or, you know, maybe you had a different employee in another category or add someone somewhere else. So just, again, you're looking at your totals. So maybe you had somebody who was working less than full-time and increased to full-time. So it's the total in the end of the day. Once you have all of your 1s and 0.5s added up, it's that total number that matters.
Okay. How does the EIDL play into all of this?
So for the most part, if you do not use your EIDL funds for payroll, then it shouldn't impact anything on your PPP. We are still waiting for some additional guidance from the SBA and the U.S. Treasury on some of these specific rules and how they're working together. And they do ask on the application, there is a line for the EIDL loan amount and grant. But so if you get the grant and use it for payroll during the same time period, then you've got some overlap. You always want to think about only using one of these provisions at a time for a particular employee. So if you don't have overlap with your EIDL, then you shouldn't have an issue with your PPP. So think about that in terms of keeping them separated. And we'll look for some more guidance on that.
This is back to the individual that had the retirees. They're asking if they should send offer letters. Ideally, you should always use an offer letter.
Yeah, and that gives you documentation. So if you send an offer letter to them, you have the documentation that you reached out, you offer them a position. And if they write back and decline, or if maybe they accept and they return, either way, if the individual does not come back and work, that gives you a 1 in your FTE count.
Next question. Those of us that are paid on the 1st and the 15th of the month, I need to understand what is covered. I'm confused.
So that is a semi-monthly pay cycle. It's covered the same way. You are still in an 8-week window. You still have your PPP loan. All of the same things are covered, provided you spend it, you use the eligible expenses. So it's cash compensation and all of the things that we talked about. It's just your window of time will have to match an 8-week cycle as opposed to a monthly cycle.
You have talked about the importance of when to apply for forgiveness, but is there a specific deadline on when we have to submit our application?
So right now it is 6 months. You have a 6-month window, and you can think of it in terms of your repayment. Right now, your first repayment is deferred 6 months. Under the new provision, there is a request to add 6 more months to that, making it through the end of the year. So that the deferments would be a 12-month deferment. So if you get your first installment, you don't have to pay back any of that loan for a 6-month window right now, which means you have that whole window of time to apply for forgiveness. So stay tuned for changes once we know what it's going to look like. They're talking about extending the 8-week window. They're talking about extending the deferral period, and they're talking about extending the payback period. So that amount is likely going to change. Right now, it is 6 months. So you have a window from your first installment of 6 months to turn in your application.
Okay, a few more questions to go, Rachel, about 8. Are we going to be screwed since we do not have a lot of the same employees working now that we had working in 2019, and they cannot go into Schedule A? I've just been putting people to work to perform our typical off-season projects.
Yeah, so it doesn't matter if it's not the same employees. It's not, you don't have to return the same individuals by name. It's not by person, it's by head count. So if you had 10 employees last year and you have 10 totally different employees this year, it's still 10. So whatever that number is, it's a 1-for-1.
Does the $100,000 cap only include salary, or does it include benefits for that person? Some staff are under 100K until you add in benefits, and then it pushes them over 100K.
Yeah, it's only cash compensation. It's the wages, tips, commissions, bonus, those dollars added together. It does not include, the full benefit package or the additional compensation that employers pay. So it's just their wage number.
As corporation owner takes the salary still and is part of payrolls, so would that be covered?
Yes. But still the caps apply.
You may have answered this. Are they looking for a true active employee count or just those paid during the tracking period? We have preschool staff not paid in June, but they are still active on the payroll.
So you're looking at the covered period. So the covered period is during the time frame where you paid out the wages. Those are the employee counts they're looking for, unless you wait and you have that window all the way through the end of June. You may be out of your 8-week window now, but if you get to the end of June and you've hired people back, then that counts. If you have people listed as active but you're not paying them, that doesn't count. This counts for people that are getting paid.
If they volunteer to reduce, the question is incomprehensible. I'm going to have to move on. Actually, that's the last few questions I have. Here's a couple more that just came in.
I see the question about the 86.67 and the semi-monthly.
Okay,
so that goes to a semi-monthly pay cycle. And as I said, when it's semi-monthly, you're going beyond 56 days. So no, you cannot just pay your 4 pay cycles in there, because that would be beyond 56 days. You are going to need to carve out some of those days. Be very careful about that. And so even if you start, some of those pay cycles will be completely within your 8-week window, but you're going to have to carve out days on the front or back.
If employees are service and commission-based and disbursement fell within a week of reopening salons, can funds be used to supplement tax return? Anyone that can back?
Yeah. Yep, absolutely. That's what it's designed for. You've got these loan dollars to pay these wages. And so if, let's say, they only have half their clients returning, but you pay them what they normally would have made last year at the same time with a full client base, that is exactly what this is for. So you can show, yes, I've got this employee back. Yes, I paid them the same amount as last year. Now you're not going to have a wage reduction. You don't have an FTE reduction. That is exactly what it's for.
This is another follow-up to the semi-monthly payroll question. If I pay 4 payrolls in that 8-week window, can I include it all?
No, I answered that. So it is no. You have to be very careful. Carve out the days. It is 56 days. It is not 60 or 61 or 62, whatever ends up being the case of 2 full months, but it is 56 days. So you will not be able to match the 8-week covered period with your pay cycle. That's why there is not a provision to change that. You just have to carve it out.
Okay, a lot of questions are coming in, folks. You just have to bear with me a little bit. How do we fill out the schedule by employee if they're different employees?
Just make a grid on your computer and write their name, and you're going to put in their compensation, and you're just going to count them as either a 1 or a 0.5. Don't worry about it. You don't need to match employees from before and after if you've got all different people, or, part-time. If you have, let's say you had 10 full-time people last year, but you have 20 part-time people this year, you're still meeting your average FTE number without a problem. So just create a grid on your computer and duplicate this worksheet that I've got on the screen and use the same numbers for your boxes.
For clarification, can we choose what period we want to use for FTE? We've been in business since '82, but made a decision to downsize during the course of 19. We would like to use the 2020 period as it's our true current company size.
Yes, you can do that. It's up to you. If you want to use the beginning of, where did I say that? If you want to use the beginning of 2020 and use January, February as your eligible period, that is totally up to you. You just list that. This is our covered period. This is our eligible period that we're choosing to use. No problem.
Can we include bonus pay?
Yes, bonus pay should be included. Again, you don't want to exceed that 100,000 threshold equivalent, but bonus dollars, commission dollars, tips, any of those dollars count toward that cash compensation number.
We pay discretionary 401k match for 2018 and 19 plan. Paying it during the 8 weeks, can we annualize it and use it for forgiveness?
Yes, you can. You can see on Schedule A, you have line 7 is where you're going to put retirement payments. And so again, what you would normally pay in the pay cycle, whatever a portion is for your retirement plan, that can go in there as well.
Believe it or not, Rachel, that is all the questions. Some of them are, folks, if you didn't hear your specific question, there was a lot of the same questions just answered a little bit differently. So for the sake of time and sanity, I chose to combine a few. Rachel, I did email you a specific question that I believe is important. I just couldn't figure out exactly what they were asking. I thought it might be better suited for you.
I didn't get it. That's okay. Listen, just going back over this again, I know there's probably still a bunch more questions out there that we didn't get to, and we will. We are going to do this again next week, and we'll do it as many times as we need to make sure everybody can get the maximum forgiveness on their PPP. And we'll keep you informed as soon as we know more. As soon as anything changes with the bill, there's a chance our form is going to change. If our form changes, we'll do this again. We'll go over it line by line until everybody has it and gets the maximum back. So we want to thank you so much for spending your coffee break with us. And we will do everything we can to keep you informed and get you more information. Don't forget to include your email address in the chat box so Cindy can send you additional information. And we'll also make sure we send you a link to the next coffee break so we can do this again. So thank you all so much. We are here for you. We want to work together with you. CertaPay really understands these challenging times, and we're in this together. We will get through it, and we will be successful. So thank you so much for joining us today.
We'll leave the chat box open for a little while so I can capture all the emails.
Good. If you guys would just dump your email in that chat box. We'll be sure to give you additional information and a copy of the slides if you want them, or follow-up questions, and we'll see you next week.